Yeah.
Perfect. Hiya, Nathan. Really nice to put a face to a name at last. I feel like I've followed and come across your stuff for quite a while now, and this is the first time we've been able to connect personally. So thanks very much for giving us the time. Um, you perhaps won't know, but I came across you and I guess joined your community back in January 2018. So you did a 7-day assessment boot camp. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So, and obviously here in the UK, ever since 2014, and we went into an assessment without levels world, there's been quite an interesting time where some schools have been really innovative and done some exciting stuff to make holistic recognition of development in young people, etc., etc. And others haven't got a clue where to start with trying to assess. So it was really nice to tune into some of those ideas and think, how can I feed that into what I'm doing? Um, and then similarly, January this year, you shared a load of stuff, game sheets, and clearly some really exciting and different ideas that, and real tangibles that you work with your students. So again, if people haven't come across those, I recommend looking them up. And then really recently, I've really enjoyed tuning in to some of your conference series and the legendary Artie that I've connected with as well, and a really nice chat. And some of that kind of purposeful PE, some nuts and bolts things that people can take away, but also a bit of prompting people to step back, press pause, think a bit more, and a nice mix of people talking. So before we kick off with the reason I've got you to tune in today, can people still access those bits and pieces, Nathan?
Yeah, so I think the Purposeful Physical Education webinar series, you should still be able to go and register for those as far as I'm aware, but actually all of the webinars and all of the online courses and all of the resources basically that I produce are now available in something called the Phys Ed Library, which is basically an all-in-one resource hub, which has all of our courses, webinars. It has all of our games, all of our assessment tools, everything inside this Phys Ed library now. So yeah, if people can't access it on that webinar page anymore that was up the sort of the conference page, then they exist within the library.
Brilliant. And I guess the bit that draws me to a lot of your work is you're not someone who's sitting in an office thinking things through. You're a guy who's trialing it day in, day out with your own students. So I guess now might be a nice time to just capture, for those that don't know, a bit of your backstory. You've been a bit of
Yeah,
a globetrotter and you've been busy, haven't you? So talk me through it.
for sure. Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, if you can't tell by my accent, like I grew up in Australia. I'm actually from Tasmania. And if you don't know where that is, it's a small, tiny little island at the bottom, sort of south of Melbourne. I think it's about 500,000 people that live there in the size of England if you take off Scotland and Wales. So, lots of space, beautiful place, beautiful part of the world. So I grew up there, went to university there, and at the time when I graduated university, there was talk of there not being a lot of jobs available for graduates. It was a really aging workforce. So a group from the UK actually came into the university and said, "Oh, hey, like, why don't you come over to the UK and do some supply teaching over here?" So me and three of my friends jumped at that and were like, "Let's do
Sorry
that."
to interject a second. Was your line of sight always towards teaching and towards phys ed, or has that changed over time?
No, I think originally, like, so the degree that I did at the time was called a Bachelor of Human Movement, and there were three different ways that you could go. You could go down a teaching route and sort of get your health and physical education degree, or you could go down a sports management route or a sports science route. And I was really interested in sports science. It was something that had always interested me. And once I sort of started the degree, I thought it was something that I would like to go down that path. But probably in the second year of my degree, I realized that one, it was really difficult. The science was tough. But two, there just wasn't a lot of job prospects, especially in Australia at that time for sports scientists. You sort of had to then go on and do an additional degree in sort of a specialization. My mum was a teacher, so I sort of knew what that entailed, and I did a couple of teaching experiences in schools, and from there I was sort of like, yeah, this is pretty good. I sort of enjoyed it. Felt like it was something I was good at. So yeah, then definitely went down that PE
Yeah.
PE teaching route.
So you land in the UK.
Yeah, I landed in the UK. Three of my friends, first time outside the country, first time outside of Australia. Um, was working with this teaching agency, and they called me one morning and said, "Oh, tomorrow we'd like you to go out to the school on the outskirts of London, Felton Community College. Um, it's an amazing school, and yeah, we'd like you to go out there for a week and do a coverage." So I was like, "All right, great." So I get on the internet and have a bit of a Google and find Felton Community College and sports academy. Looks amazing. Thinking like, "Oh, this seems all right," and then get on the train and head out to Feltham and go past the prison and a young offenders prison. And there's the school next to the young offenders. And a lot of the actual students from the school were on day release from the young offenders. So it was a baptism of fire.
Yeah.
I wasn't prepared at all for the public school system in the UK at that time. This was in the early, or I guess early to mid 2000s.
Yeah.
But I survived my week there, and then did a few other schools around the place in sort of West London and South London. And then I ended up settling in a special needs school in Hampton,
Yeah.
just near Hampton Court Palace. And I was there for 2 years teaching a variety of different things to like grade 9 and 10 level students. But they were, it was a special education needs for behavioral and emotional social. So it was again a new challenge, but something that I really, really enjoyed my time in the UK.
And I think that it gives a great grounding, doesn't it? I mean, I do a lot with the teacher aid program at Loughborough Uni, and I think one of the most valuable things is to have a tough school to start in, but also some of that special needs exposure. And if you can make it work with tricky customers and with those perhaps with some specific needs that are hard to match, then you'll cut it anywhere, won't you? And often it's the most rewarding places to work as well.
Yeah, I think it was probably, if I look back on all of my different experiences, that was one that was the most challenging, but also the most rewarding. Like, and the connection that I had to those kids, I only had, I think in my class, I had like 11 kids. But I still remember every single one of those kids. And yeah, it was a really, really special experience. And it taught me a lot about not only being a teacher, but just being a human being, like being able to sort of create those relationships and work out how to help these kids that had some pretty significant, issues going on in their lives.
You learn to listen rather than to talk all the time, don't you?
For sure.
Yeah. And then it was back on the plane to Italy.
Actually, no. So there was another stop between there. So I actually left the UK. I didn't want to leave the UK. At the time the visa laws were changing, and I would have had to go back to Australia to renew my visa. I had a friend do it, and she ended up getting stuck back in Australia for almost a year, and she was paying rent in Australia and the UK at the time. So it seemed like not a great idea at the time, but I really wanted to stay. So I started to explore the international scene a little bit, and found a job in Cambodia, which I knew nothing about. And so I went there for a year. It was a brand new school. I was teaching again, grade 7, grade 8 generalist, and I had 6 kids in my class.
Grade 7, grade 8. What age is that, Nathan?
So that's what, like
11,
11, 12, 13.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So yeah, I had 6 kids in the class because it was a brand new school. So that was another interesting experience. And then the PE teacher actually, he ended up like leaving the school really suddenly to go back to his home country. So they didn't have a PE teacher at that point. And because I had a PE background, I ended up saying, well, I guess I can do it. So I was teaching full-time in the classroom as well as like teaching PE for the elementary school there. So it was like almost a double load. So I did that for a year. And then from there, I ended up in Italy for a couple of years. And that was my first international baccalaureate school. So I was teaching a primary years program and the middle years program there. That was my first like, full-time PE position, because previous to that I've been teaching, these classroom jobs and a little bit of PE here and there. So that was great to get back into sort of my passion and what I trained in. But it was a bilingual school, so I was under the impression that well, kids will speak English, like it'll be fine. 99% of the kids were Italian. Maybe one of their parents was not Italian, but they all spoke Italian. So I get into the gym on the first day, and I start speaking to the kids, and just blank faces, like no, especially with an Australian accent as well, like just no idea what I was saying.
So your
So
visual
again, that
cues
was,
picked up.
yeah, a lot of visuals, a lot of learning some very specific Italian vocabulary around sport. Um, Mostly to do with soccer or football, because the kids were just absolutely obsessed with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, another great experience, because again, I'm sort of now I'm teaching and learning in a second language. All of our staff and faculty meetings are being like translated between English and Italian, and yeah, that was an amazing experience. So I was there for a couple of years. So that's where I met my now wife. She was also an international teacher that was there. And then after a couple of years there, we decided to go together to Singapore, where we spent 5 years working in Singapore at another IB school. I was teaching elementary PE, so primary PE.
Yeah.
I was also doing sort of welfare and enrichment activities and student life sort of stuff there for 5 years. And after 5 years there, our first daughter was born in Singapore, and shortly after that, we moved back here to Canada to be close to my wife's family. And I've been here for, I guess, 3 years now. So yeah, bit of everything, bit of different curriculums, different schools, different languages, different places. But I think all of it is put me in a great position to be able to sort of help other teachers, I guess, because I've had such a varied experience.
Well, it certainly enriches you, doesn't it? I don't know if you've come across Matthew Said's Rebel Ideas book, but it talks quite a lot about that kind of collective intelligence and borrowing from different cultures. And I guess you've almost had the opportunity to do that within your own career, to I guess think on what really matters and what stuff you can try and drive change in. So listeners will realise why I really wanted to connect with you and have this conversation. I feel like we could do around the world in Nathan's life. Would probably cover off this global insight piece. But I guess the bit that I'm trying to unpick is maybe how the curriculum, particularly the PE curriculum, differed between those different locations.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think obviously growing up in Australia, sport is very much a part of life there. It's a way of life. And so, I mean, I just was obsessed with sports as a kid. That was my passion. And I just, whatever sport was available, I wanted to be a part of. And I think that was also reflected in the curriculum in Australia at the time was very much like sport centric, I would say. Like everybody wanted to be a sports star and a sports player. And there's a lot of like community sport that's involved in Australia. Like every small town and every place has their football club and their netball club and their cricket club. So that was definitely part of my background.
Community, isn't it? And I think it's the same in France as well, actually.
Yeah. And then there was also school sport as well. I guess like a lot of in high school, like everybody played for the school. So there was that aspect as well. So that was sort of my background growing up. And then coming to the UK there was similarities, I think, in terms of that sport culture. But I think the curriculum in schools was a little bit different. I found the UK to be a lot more prescriptive than Australia. I found Australia had gone through this stage of like inquiry-based approach, and a lot of my training was in that sort of inquiry, student-centered approach to learning. And then I went to the UK, and it was very much, national curriculum. Week 1, here's what you're teaching. Week 2, here's what you're teaching. Those sort of 6-week units of, you're going to do badminton, then you're going to do football, then rugby, and then gymnastics. And whereas in Australia, they'd gone more towards the, I guess, teaching games for understanding approach, where you've got more those game categories of invasion games and striking and fielding, and trying to transfer skills across. So that was one difference that I noticed. And then in the international system, in Cambodia, I guess there wasn't really much guidance, because it was a brand new school and they were just trying to find their feet. So it really fell on me to just do what I thought was best, and what I hopefully knew was best. Italy again was IB, so very inquiry based. But having said that, because it was bilingual, there was also the Italian component to it. So you're trying to satisfy the international baccalaureate's sort of curriculum, but also make sure that you're satisfying the Italian curriculum, which, if you don't understand the language, is very difficult to do. And again, I would say the Italian curriculum is somewhat similar to the UK. It was very prescriptive. So you've got this competing ideas of, inquiry based, but also do this, from the Italian point of view. So that was a challenge. And then Singapore again was IB, and Singapore is a very progressive, innovative place. So lots of opportunity to try new things, experiments. And I would say that was where my sort of teaching career really, I guess, flourished, just because of the environment
Creativity.
there. Yeah. And then Canada, again, very similar. I'm lucky that I work in an independent school, and it's again an international baccalaureate, world school. So again, lots of inquiry based stuff. And I would say one difference is a lot of the public schools here in British Columbia, where I am, don't have elementary physical education teachers in them full time. It's just taught by the class teacher.
Yeah.
So being in the independent system is great because we do have elementary PE. So there's myself and another teacher that teach the elementary or the primary years, which is, I guess, unique because a lot of schools in
Almost
Canada don't have
that
that.
idea of a PE specialist, which similar.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you've kept up with what's going on in the UK and in England specifically, but the 2014 national curriculum stripped a lot of that prescription out. Particularly the PE bit of the national curriculum is now a page and a half long at primary and the same at secondary. There's an awful lot of freedom, but I guess with that freedom comes a responsibility to be creative and to come up with something new and fresh and that fits the context. And I think in a lot, there's some schools that are doing an incredible job of that, but it's very fragmented. There's others that don't really see a way to, or what that could look like, and therefore they continue to do what a really prescriptive model gave them previously. We stick to what we know, don't we? In the absence of nice ideas from elsewhere. And I guess that's why I like connecting with you and signposting people in your direction, because it enables thinking outside the box a little bit. Like you said, a lot more of the learner at the heart of what's going on and the inquiry based. So I guess that leads nicely into a question about, so what would a typical PE lesson look like for you now in Canada, or just pre-COVID in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, obviously things have changed a lot now, but I guess for me, I like to. I've never been one that is stuck on it. I think a lot of teachers get stuck on, well, the kids have to be moving all the time. The kids have to be like, they're not getting there. I know in the US they call it MVPA, like you have to get 60% or 70% of your lesson as moderate to vigorous physical activity. I've never been one that really is like, that's the most important thing to me. I think for me, it's about relationships. It's about giving kids opportunity to think, and to solve problems and to sort of create their own world in a sense. Like I think, like, we only get the kids in PE, if you're lucky, you might get them once a week, you might get them twice a week if you're super lucky. And they only get that from, say, if they're lucky, a kindergarten to grade 10 or grade 12, and then they're out in the world. So if they're just getting told what to do and told how to do it, and given these prescriptive things, I don't think that sets them up for a life of being physically active or having the skills and the capabilities to be able to make choices around how to stay healthy and how to be engaged in physical activity for a lifetime. So I think for me, it's about getting kids engaged in decision making, getting kids engaged in trying to solve problems. So yes, my kids are moving a lot of the time, but there's also a lot of opportunities for questioning and opportunities for, getting their ideas about how they think things should be happening. So I'll often, like, a typical lesson might be, getting the kids to come into the gym if we're in the gym, or if we're out on the field or wherever we are, get them moving for the first couple of minutes, just doing something to sort of shake off wherever they've been, if they've just come from a math class or they've come from French, or who knows where they've been and what baggage they're bringing to me. So just sort of get those wiggles out a little bit, and then it'll be into sort of like the focus of the lesson. Here's what we're going to do today. Here's what we're focusing on. Opportunities for questions. I like to do a lot of smaller group stuff, small-sided games, because I think that enables kids to have more opportunity to engage in the game, the more that they're in the game, the more they're making decisions, the more decisions they're making, the better that they're developing those skills and that decision making ability. And then it also enables me as a teacher to be able to go around and sort of like interact with smaller groups, pull kids aside if they need additional assistance, move kids between groups as well. So yeah, I would say that's, for me, it's a dynamic sort of thing. I don't think I could say that every lesson looks the same, or that there's a routine that I normally follow. A lot of the time it is sort of like, as those kids come in, sort of getting a bit of a feel of where they're at and then sort of going from there.
And it feels like you've sort of built up your repertoire, your toolkit of basically play, but play with a purpose. And
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if, as you say, if every lesson is different, but would I almost recognise games? You mentioned earlier about soccer or football. Would I recognise those games in action, or is it more that small-sided creative?
Yeah, I think so. I think like the way I like to do things, and if you're familiar with, like you said, the game sheets and stuff that you shared before, like that idea of building sort of tactical complexity or skill complexity through a game. So starting at the very basic level of the game and then trying to build it up. So at a very basic level, it might not look like soccer. Like a good example is like, so we're looking at like net and wall games. Just having two students with a ball, sort of throwing it back and forward to each other and just trying to have it bounce once and catch it anywhere in the space in the gym. That would be, for me, like at the very basic level, a very basic net and wall game, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to send an object somewhere else, and then also receive that object. And then say you throw a skipping rope down or you put a line between them, and now the game changes a little bit. And they're having to sort of think about, well, how do I get that object to go past that barrier? And then maybe you add some boundaries, and now the ball has to stay within the boundaries. And then next you make the game competitive, and it changes the way that the game's being played. But all of those decisions and all of the skills and all of the things that the students are working on in those modified games can then be transferred across into tennis and badminton and volleyball and all of those bigger net and wall games. So especially at like a primary level or an elementary level, I like to start with that really basic stuff and sort of build it up. And then, as I said, because you're working, you can have like lots of smaller groups working. You could have one group who's still working on just throwing and catching because they don't have that skill yet. But then you could have other groups working on, using bats and balls and boundaries and different size nets. But they're still focused on the same learning outcome, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that differentiation builds itself, doesn't it? And then they're always, I guess I talk a lot about the tipping point and pushing them just outside that level of comfort, but where they're motivated to get better. Yeah. Okay, that's really helpful. And then I guess with literally as we record this, we've just had the announcements that we're going to start to try and reopen schools from the 1st of June. And so teachers are obviously thinking, well, what do we do for the next few weeks whilst our students are at home to continue to inspire and excite them, but I guess put some of that education in as well as the physical activity whilst they're at home. What does that look like for you guys at the moment?
Yeah, so we've been off, I guess, doing at-home learning since, I guess, the end of March. It's now, it's the middle of May. So I think when we first went off, like we went on our spring break for 2 weeks, and at that time things hadn't really ramped up that much, and it was still sort of new, and there was talk of, oh, maybe we'll be off for like a week when we come back, and then everything will get back to normal. And then sort of during that spring break, things pretty rapidly changed. But having said that, my school was prepared in advance. That we sort of had systems in place. The kids already use a platform called Seesaw. And so they already had that knowledge, and then it was just about building. So we use, right now what we're doing is a mix of synchronous and asynchronous. So synchronous being the Zoom calls with the kids, and then the asynchronous stuff would be activities that we're posting on Seesaw for them to complete. So in my situation, my classes, I see them once a week. Originally I was seeing the whole class at once, so like 20 odd kids at once on Zoom, but that was unmanageable. So we've broken that into 2 groups. So I see half of the class at a time for 20 minutes. So I'll see them for 20 minutes on Zoom once a week. We'll sort of try and get up and move a little bit, because who knows what they're doing at home, whether they are moving or not. So I'll definitely spend at least for the first part of that 20 minutes getting them up moving. And then from there, it is introducing them basically to the task for that week, and sort of showing them what they can do. And I've done a variety of different things, like from, create your own target game using a pair of socks and some towels, to make an obstacle course. We focused on some health content around nutrition, and having them go and look in their house for different food items. I've just started with my grade 5 students sort of at home Olympics challenge thing. So this week they're doing bottle flips. How many bottle flips can they get in 60 seconds? And then they're going to get points that go towards their house, and they're super excited about that. So I think it's been a mix of trying to keep that connection and keep that relationship going, but also give them opportunities to do stuff. And I think my school has been great because they haven't told the kids or the families that they have to do these things. It's sort of a suggestion, and we're giving them opportunities to learn, but we know that everyone's situation is different, and who knows what's actually happening in kids' homes. So I think if we can provide them opportunities to do stuff, and we can make sure that we're there for them when they need to speak to us, or that they want to connect with us that once a week, I think that's my favorite time, is that 20 minutes that I actually get to be face to face with the kids on Zoom.
Yeah, and I know from a lot of the schools I speak with in England, that social connection point isn't there. And of course there's loads of challenges with tech and trying to get that working. But I think the teachers, but I'm sure the students are really missing that, the relationship that started to grow, and with each other, but also with their teacher. And that's the thing that I guess may well be hard to get back in this void. Who knows what that might look like? So
yeah.
Okay, well that's really interesting. That idea of one moment of a social touch point with a smaller group, but then also some stuff to get on with and to play and challenge themselves with at home.
I think there's like, I've heard of a few, like I have obviously friends all over the world, and there's been like lots of different ways of approaching it. Like I know some schools are running like full timetables. So, if the kids had PE for an hour, and now they're on Zoom for an hour with their teacher. And I mean, personally, I just think it's crazy. Like having the kids basically like be on a computer from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. or whatever the school day is. So I think from my perspective and my experience and what I'm seeing, I think that sort of mix of like that synchronous, quick check-ins, providing opportunities for kids to interact with each other or with the teacher is really important. And then the rest is that sort of like, here's some ideas and here's some activities you can do, and do it in your own time, because you might have some time to do it now. You might not be able to do it now because who knows what's happening with parents and where you are and stuff. So I think for me, that's what I think the schools that are doing a really good job of it right now are finding that balance and not trying to overload kids. And I think that comes
parents as well, isn't it? It's overloading for a parent to be thinking, I'm stuck at home, I'm trying to do my work, I'm trying to do homeschooling, and there's just a sheer volume of stuff coming through potentially.
Well, I think it's also like everybody wanting to feel like that they're doing the best job that they can, and feeling like that they're staying relevant. And the kids are at home, they need stuff to do, but it is about that, finding that balance and being okay to say, like, hey, like let's just slow things down a little bit. And even for myself, like I found that the types of activities that I'm getting the kids to do now on a weekly basis are a lot less involved than they were when I first started this at-home learning. Like they had these like amazing, what I thought were amazing lessons, but it was just too much for the kids to manage on their own. So now it's sort of just really paring it back and giving them really manageable things that they can do on their own, maybe without the need for their parents to be able to help them. And I think, there's a quote that I've seen floating around a lot, and I shared it in the webinars that I did a couple of weeks ago, is, we're not trying to teach PE from home right now. We're at home during a crisis, a pandemic, trying our best to teach PE. And we have to give ourselves that permission and say, like, we don't need to be teaching PE as it would normally be taught or this amazing lesson. We just need to make sure that we're connecting with kids and providing them opportunities to move.
Absolutely. I guess here's the $1 million question is, if you had that crystal ball, we're talking again in this country at the moment about the recovery curriculum. what do we do once the gates reopen? Have you had any thoughts about what you think return to school for students will look like and what you'll be doing?
Yeah, an interesting one. It sort of scares me a little bit, and I've been trying not to think about it too much. We're in a similar situation here in Canada where things are they're starting to talk about reopening schools, and I guess there's talk of June maybe going back part time for the last month before the summer, and then September things really reopening fully. I think what worries me is the restrictions that are going to be placed upon schools, and the idea that like schools are not going to look like what we expect them to. Schools are going to look very different, and I think that there's some obviously governmental pressure about well, kids need to be in school because parents need to work, and but what I worry that's going to get lost in that is that, I guess, social piece and that connection piece. And, if you've got kids, I've heard stories of different places where, kids have to sit in their desk all day and they can't move and they're not allowed to go to the gym and they're not allowed to do this. And saw a photograph yesterday of kids, I think it was in France, like out on the playground with chalk squares around them. And I just think that like that I think has the potential to damage kids and damage teachers and damage those relationships that we've built. So I wonder like how we manage that, and whether that combination of online learning and in-school learning, and how does that work. And I'm lucky that both my kids are not school age right now. Like I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, but I spoke to my wife and I said, what, like if our 3-year-old was going back to school right now, like I don't know whether I would send her if she's just going to be asked to sit in a desk all day. And I think it looks different for, older kids, but especially in the primary level, like I think we risk really doing a lot of harm to kids, I think, emotionally and with their mental well-being, if we are just constantly forcing them to, don't touch this, don't do that, don't sit here. So it's a tough one. From a PE perspective, I think it's going to be a lot of individual activities. It's going to be, using your own equipment, not sharing equipment. So it's not going to look the same. But I think that maybe that forces us to think about the bigger picture of PE, and it not being, how do we develop these great rugby players or soccer players or basketballers, but how do we develop individuals, and how do we provide opportunities for individuals to find things that are meaningful for them? Because I feel like we're going to be in this for a little while, and we're going to stumble through, and some things are going to work, some things are not going to work. But I think it's going to be, how do we engage individuals in meaningful physical activity and meaningful, I guess, life. Like how can you stay healthy, and how can you stay happy, and how can you be active when there's so many restrictions placed upon you?
Absolutely. And I guess, how can you, as a teacher, how can you facilitate, how can you help them find that thing that they've got intrinsic motivation to get on and do? Because some of the stuff you talked about earlier, some of that more drill style and direct instruction, is unlikely to lead to them walking out of the school gates and wanting to do lots more of that in their own time. So trying to open up opportunities for them, I guess.
Yeah, I've always been a believer in that stuff, that like there are sports clubs and there are sports teams that can, if you're really interested in rugby or football or basketball, then we'll do a little bit of it in school, and we'll give you some background into it. But here's a great club, or here's a great team that you can go and like really focus on that stuff. So COVID or not, I think that's always been my opinion. So I think there's some scary parts of what's going to come, but I think there's also opportunity to really, like you said, step back and think, okay, well, what is the actual purpose of PE, and what is the purpose of what I'm trying to achieve as a physical educator? If that is to develop great sports people, then maybe coaching would be more of an avenue for you to go down. But I think as a PE teacher, it's got to be about, how do we help kids to love to be active, and find those lifelong activities that they're going to be able to do and enjoy and feel confident in.
That sound. I mean, we could talk on all night, Nathan, but that feels like a nice moment to stop, I think. And yeah, that takeaway message about how can we help them find what will help them.
Sure.
Perfect.